This is episode 7, part 2, where I'll cover book 13 of the Iliad. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, go back and listen to that. It covers book 12. Okay, and now on to book 13. Book 13 opens with Zeus being very Zeus. Now Zeus, after that he had brought the Trojans and Hector to the ships, left them to their toil and endless labor there. To Troy no more at all turned he his shining eyes, for he deemed in his heart that not one of the immortals would draw near to help either Trojans or Danaans. So having gotten the Trojans into the Greek camp, Zeus immediately loses interest and his attention wanders off to various other peoples, both real like the Thracians and fictional like the Abioi. What does he want? Book 12 ended with Hector breaking the Greek gate and leaping triumphantly inside. How much excitement is needed to keep Zeus's attention? What else is going on in 1185 BCE that's more exciting than this? But Poseidon, who sides with the Greeks, was watching the battle and sad over the apparent imminent destruction of the Greeks. And once Poseidon saw that Zeus's attention had wandered, he sprang into action. 3 strides he made, and with the 4th he reached his goal, even Aegae, and there was his famous palace in the deeps of the mere, his glistering golden mansions builded, imperishable forever. Thither went he, and let harness to the car his bronze-hooved horses, swift of flight, clothed with their golden manes. He girt his own golden array about his body, and seized the well-wrought lash of gold, and mounted his chariot, and forth he drove across the waves. And the sea beasts frolicked beneath him, on all sides out of the deeps, for well they knew their lord, and with gladness the sea stood asunder, and swiftly they sped, and the axle of bronze was not wetted beneath, and the bounding steeds bare him on to the ships of the Achaeans. From his perch atop the mountains of Samothrace, an island in the North Aegean Sea, Poseidon took 3 giant strides of a god and reached his palace on the seafloor near Aegae, which is near Evia, off the east coast of the Greek mainland, about 170 miles away. We get a glimpse of Poseidon's wondrous undersea palace here, imperishable forever, with undersea creatures dancing around, very exciting and exotic. He comes here to get his chariot and his horses, all bronze and gold, and from here he rides off to the battlefield to aid the Greeks. And since I had already calculated the distance from Samothrace to his palace, I decided to look into it, and I saw that it actually would have been quicker for Poseidon to just taken one of his big steps and gone straight from Samothrace to Troy, a distance of only 48 miles. But maybe Poseidon likes to roll up in style. Oh, but wait, no rolling up in style. Poseidon parks his chariot in an undersea canyon out between the islands of Imbros and Tenedos. Imbros isn't too far from Samothrace, really, and Tenedos is not far off the coast of Troy, southwest of the city, only a few miles offshore. Tenedos can certainly be seen from the coast, and actually this island will play an important part in the eventual fall of Troy. The Greeks will hide their ships behind the island of Tenedos, making it seem like they've given up and gone home, while they wait for the Trojans to fall for the old, of course it wasn't old at that time, the old Trojan horse trick. This is not an Iliad spoiler because the fall of Troy happens after the end of the Iliad. The end of the Iliad I will not spoil for you if you haven't gotten there yet, because it is a beautiful and complex emotional moment that needs to be built up to. So, now that we've caught up with what Zeus and Poseidon are up to, we pick up exactly where Book 12 left off. Hector, charging through the gate he had just broken down, with the massed army of the Trojans and their allies running behind him. This is where Poseidon comes in. He takes the form of Calchas, the Greek prophet you might remember from much earlier in the Iliad. He's the one who told Agamemnon that Apollo was angry with him for stealing his priest's daughter. And when Agamemnon was forced to return her, he stole Achilles' war bride, which set in motion the current difficulties for the Greeks. And by the way, war bride, that's an old-fashioned term designed to make all this human trafficking not sound as horrible as it is. But it is. Poseidon, now as Calchas, comes in to rile the Greeks up for battle, starting with the Aiases. He says to them, "Ye Iantes twain, ye shall save the people of the Achaeans, if ye are mindful of your might, and reckless of chill fear. For verily, I do not otherwhere dread the invincible hands of the Trojans that have climbed the great wall in their multitude. Nay, the well-greaved Achaeans will hold them all at bay. But hereby verily do I greatly dread, lest some evil befall us, even here where that furious one is leading like a flame of fire. Hector, who boasts him to be son of mighty Zeus. Nay, but here may some god put it into the hearts of you twain to stand sturdily yourselves, and urge others to do the like. Thereby might ye drive him from the fleet-faring ships, despite his eagerness, yea, even if the Olympian himself is rousing him to war. Poseidon then taps both Aiases with his staff, and flies off into the sky. Aias the Lesser recognizes that it must have been a god that did this, but doesn't know which god. Yeah, that didn't really take a lot of sleuthing there, but good job cracking the case, oily Aias. But he does note that he feels much stronger now, more able to face the Trojans, and Aias the Greater agrees, saying, even so, too, my hands invincible now rage about the spear shaft, and wrath has risen within me, and both my feet are swift beneath me. Yea, I am keen to meet, even in single fight, the ceaseless rage of Hector, son of Priam. So these guys have been powered up for the fight, but it will take more than the two Aiases to stop the Trojans, who are already inside the camp right now. Let's see what Poseidon is up to next. So now Poseidon is over among the other Greeks, who are cowering between the ships, shedding tears of despair. Who's over here? It's Teucros, and Lytos, and Thoas, and Deipyros, and Penelos, and Meriones, and Antilochos. And out of these is Teucros, Meriones, and Antilochos you should pay attention to. The others are all beyond minor characters. Poseidon is still in the form of Calchas, remember, the seer, the guy that they've hired to help them understand the will of the gods. A lot of times the gods' disguises are a little bit random, but this time it's perfect. Poseidon as Calchas now says to these fellas, shame on you, Argives, shame, ye striplings. In your battle had I trusted for the salvation of our ships. But if you are to withdraw from grievous war, now indeed the day doth shine that shall see us conquered by the Trojans. Out on it, for verily a great marvel is this that mine eyes behold, a terrible thing that methought should never come to pass, the Trojans advancing against our ships. Of yore they were like fleeting hinds, that in the wild wood are the prey of jackals and pards and wolves, and wander helpless, strengthless, empty of the joy of battle. Even so, the Trojans of old cared never to wait and face the wrath in the hands of the Achaeans, not for a moment. But now they are fighting far from the town, by the hollow ships, all through the baseness of our leader and the remissness of our people, who, being at strife with the chief, have no heart to defend the swift-faring ships. Nay, thereby they are slain. But if indeed, and in truth, the hero Agamemnon, the wide-ruling son of Atreus, is the very cause of all, for that he did dishonor the swift-footed son of Peleus, not even so may we refrain in any wise from war. Nay, let us right our fault with speed, for easily righted are the hearts of the brave. No longer do ye well to refrain from impetuous might, all ye that are the best men of the host. I myself would not quarrel with one that, being a weakling, abstain from war, but with you I'm heartily wroth. Ah, friends, soon ye shall make the mischief more through this remissness. But let each man conceive shame in his heart and indignation, for verily great is the strife that has arisen. Lo, the mighty Hector of the loud war cry is fighting at the ships and the gates, and the long bar he hath burst in sunder. This is enough. Poseidon has re-energized enough of the Greeks that these powered-up guys are now going around encouraging all the others. The will to fight again spreads like wildfire, and the Greeks reform for battle amid the ships now, gathering around the two Aiases. Facing the Greeks, the Trojans are also assembling, Hector as always at the forefront, with the energy inherent in a boulder tumbling down a mountain. It might threaten to break all the way through to the sea. But as a boulder will lose its energy rolling across a level plain well before reaching the sea, so now Hector faces opposition that might stop his rolling. The Greeks are now closely packed, filling the spaces between the ships, basically making a new wall, one composed alternatingly of their bodies and their ships. but this is a somewhat tricky situation. It will be hard for the Greeks in one alley between ships to know that their comrades in an adjacent alley are struggling and need reinforcements. So they'll have to watch their backs that the Trojans haven't broken through and are now coming up behind them. Also, keep in mind that the ships themselves are what the Greeks have really been wanting to defend all along. The ships are not only incredibly valuable in themselves, but more importantly, they represent the strategic ability to move their army as needed. If the ships burn, the Greeks are trapped and easily slaughtered to the last man. Hector is getting ready to charge. He announces to the assembled Trojans and their allies, Trojans and Lycians and close-fighting Dardanians, hold your ground, for the Achaeans will not long ward me off. Nay, though they have arrayed themselves in fashion like a tower. Rather, methinks, they will flee back before the spear, if verily the chief of gods has sent me on, the loud thundering lord of Hera. Fired up by his brother's speech, Deiphobos now advances against Meriones, who casts a spear at Deiphobos and hits Deiphobos' shield, planting the spear right into the shield, which saves Deiphobos. The head of the spear breaks off the shaft. Meriones has to go off to get another spear now, angry at himself for not killing a son of Priam when he had the chance. But Deiphobos is really shaken by this encounter. Teucros now kills a Trojan named Imbros, using a spear, not his usual bow, as there's not room in this close fighting amid the ships for archery. Imbros had been married to a daughter of Priam, one of his many children. Teucros thrusted and withdrew his spear, so he still got it with him a moment later when he rushes in to loot Imbros' corpse. Dude, the Trojans are here in your camp. Teucros, where are you going to put loot that they can't just loot it right back from you? These guys and their looting, it's really too much. Hector now flings a spear at Teucros as he's running to loot that corpse, but it hits Amphimachos instead. Now Hector goes to yoink the helmet off of dead Amphimachos. Do these guys have like a whole baggage train, like a whole bunch of guys ready to just grab all the loot for them? And while Hector's pulling off the helmet, Aias lunges out with his spear and attacks Hector. And when the text doesn't specify, I generally assume it's Aias the Greater, aka Telamonian Aias, that they're talking about. Aias is not able to hurt Hector through his full body bronze armor, but his attack is enough to get Hector to back off long enough for the Greeks to haul off both corpses, Imbros and Amphimachos. Amphimachos, as a Greek, for proper funeral rites, if and when the hostilities cease for the Greeks, and Imbros for a more thorough looting. Having regained the body of Amphimachos, Aias the Lesser, aka Oilean Aias, chops off Imbros' head and throws it at the Trojans, where it bounces and rolls and lands at Hector's feet. Oilean Aias may seem like this somewhat interesting character. It's a little weird we have two Aiases, but, that's just how it is. And it's also complicated that the two Aiases hang out together a lot, but, Oilean Aias, though, I want to just say a little tangent on him. He's got a bit of a dark side. Much later than this, once the Greeks have taken Troy, many of the Greeks commit crimes that impede their returns home. The most famous of these crimes being Odysseus blinding the Cyclops Polyphemus, who is Poseidon's son, and that's why Poseidon makes it so hard for Odysseus to get home. That's why we have the Odyssey. But Oilean Aias' crime is probably the worst. In the least awful version of his story, while the Greeks are taking the city of Troy, Priam's daughter Cassandra is inside the temple of Athene, clutching the statue of the goddess in supplication. And in the culture of that time, that was, you did not violate the temple in this way. But Aias did. In the least bad version, he drags her away and puts her with the other captives. That's the least bad version, this offense against the sanctity of the temple. The other versions just get worse from there. So my point is that this guy makes some bad decisions when he's in his heroic rage state. This throwing of the head, it kind of fits in with who he is. And the heroic rage state, the controlling and effectively using heroic rage, is what heroes are supposed to be doing. So Poseidon now, he's got some heroic rage himself because Amphimachos was his grandson. So Poseidon wants revenge now. It's not just about helping the Greeks because he prefers their side in the war. It's about his family. Let's see if Poseidon can use his heroic rage any better. Poseidon now goes over to the left side of the battle where Idomeneus and Meriones are fighting. And he takes the form of Thoas, the leader from Aetolia. He turns to Idomeneus, who's nearby, and says, Idomeneus, thou counselor of the Cretans, say, whither have thy threats fared, wherewith the sons of the Achaeans threatened the Trojans? Idomeneus doesn't realize he's talking to a god, and moreover one who's pissed that the Greeks just let his grandson die. And so Idomeneus says to Poseidon as Thoas, O Thoas, now is there no man to blame that I wot of, for we are all skilled in war. Neither is there any man that spiritless fear holds aloof, nor any that gives place to cowardice and shuns the cruel war. Nay, but even thus, methinks, must it have seemed good to almighty Cronion, even that the Achaeans should perish nameless here, far away from Argos. But Thoas, seeing thou of old wert staunch, and dost spur on some other man, wheresoever thou mayest see any give ground, therefore slacken not now, but call aloud to every warrior. So Poseidon must see that getting pissed at Idomeneus isn't going to help. What will help is getting Idomeneus more fired up for battle, because that was kind of a weak sauce response. So he does just that. And after this exchange, Idomeneus is now powered up as well. He's fired up for battle. And now he returns to his hut to put on all of his armor and grab some weapons. So Poseidon has succeeded in getting Idomeneus back into the battle. I guess Idomeneus was just chilling on the beach up until this point. On the way to his hut, Idomeneus finds Meriones, his friend and fellow Cretan, and says to him, Meriones, son of Molos, fleet of foot, dearest of my company, wherefore hast thou come hither and left the war and strife? Art thou wounded at all and vexed by a dart's point? Or dost thou come with a message for me concerning aught? Verily, I myself have no desire to sit in the huts, but to fight. So he's been all fired up by Poseidon, who's now got the center and left sides of the camp all riled up for war. Meriones responds that he's looking for another spear, since he just ruined his when it broke off in the shield of Deiphobos. Idomeneus responds, Spears, if thou wilt, thou shalt find, 1 eye and 20, standing in the hut, against the shining side walls, spears of the Trojans, whereof I had spoiled their slain. Yea, it is not my mood to stand and fight with foemen from afar. Wherefore I have spears and bossy shields and helms and corslets of splendid sheen. That's a lot. Can you imagine someone interacting with you who's just talking at you like that? I mean, it just asks to borrow a spear and you get all that. Idomeneus is saying he's got plenty of spears in his hut and armors too, all stuff that he looted off Trojans that he's killed. And he implies he's got so many spears because he doesn't throw them from a distance and therefore lose them. He fights close up, man to man. Is Idomeneus implying something about Meriones here? Meriones, not wanting to sound like he fights from a distance all the time, says that he's got a lot of spears in his hut too. Yeah, a lot of them. I got lots of spears, but my hut is so far away. How inconvenient. Maybe I can borrow one of yours, Idomeneus. Now, I didn't know all the details of how the Greek camp was arranged, but it seemed unlikely to me that the two Cretans would have had their ships too terribly far away from each other. As for the layout of the camp, I could recall off the top of my head that Odysseus' ships are in the center, with Achilles' at one end and Telamonian and Aias' at the other. But I kind of wanted to bust Meriones on this point, this idea that his ships were too far away from his fellow Cretans. So I dug around online and I came across this really great resource that I talked to you about in episode 12. This is the link that you'll find in the show notes, all work done by Professor Jenny Strauss Clay at the University of Virginia. So there is a map in her work based on very close readings of the Iliad that locates where in the camp the various leaders' ships are placed. And she's got Meriones, as I guessed, right there with Idomeneus on the left side next to Telamonian and Aias. So Meriones, you're busted, which is what I set out to do. So, back to Idomeneus and Meriones. I think Idomeneus must have seen right through Meriones' dissembling as well. But I think he just lets it slide, and he says, in the center of the ships, there are others to bear the brunt, the two Iantes and Teucros, the best bowmen of the Achaeans. I, and a good man in a close fight. These will give Hector, Priam's son, toil enough, howsoever keen he be for battle, yea, though he be exceeding stalwart. But guide us twain, as thou sayest, to the left hand of the host, that speedily we may learn whether we are to win glory from others, or other men from us. That was really sweet of Idomeneus to spare his friend's feelings. Now Meriones gets a spear from Idomeneus' loot hoard, and they discuss where they would be most effective in battle. And they decide that they would be most effective where they already are, on the left side of the camp, with their own men there to support them. The Trojans see Idomeneus coming at them, and when the Trojans saw Idomeneus, strong as flame, and his squire with him, and their glorious armor, they all shouted and made for him through the press. Then their melee began by the stems of the ships. And as the gusts speed on, when shrill winds blow, on a day when dust lieth thickest on the roads, and the winds raise together a great cloud of dust, even so their battle clashed together, and all were fain of heart to slay each other in the press with the keen bronze. And the battle, the bane of men, bristled with the long spears, the piercing spears they grasped, and the glitter of bronze from gleaming helmets dazzled the eyes, and the sheen of new burnished corslets and shining shields, as the men thronged all together. Right hearty of heart would he have been that had joyed and sorrowed not at the sight of this labor of battle. Soon, a mass of Trojans are attacking Idomeneus and Meriones. Idomeneus, at least, is blinding in his dazzling polished armor. Meriones, over there, swinging that borrowed spear at some Trojans. Now, the narrator wants to talk about the idea that there are two divine sons of Kronos, both active in the war now, Zeus and Poseidon. Thus, the two mighty sons of Kronos, with contending will, were contriving sorrow and anguish for the heroes. Zeus desired victory for the Trojans and Hector, giving glory to swift-footed Achilles. Yet he did not wish the Achaean host to perish utterly before Ilios, but only to give renown to Thetis and her strong-hearted son. But Poseidon went among the Argives and stirred them to war, stealing secretly forth from the grey salt sea. For he was sore vexed that they were overcome by the Trojans, and was greatly in wrath against Zeus. Verily, both were of the same lineage, and the same place of birth, but Zeus was the elder and the wiser. Therefore also Poseidon avoided to give open aid, but secretly ever he spurred them on throughout the host, in the likeness of a man. The two gods, both sons of the Titan Kronos, Zeus and Poseidon, are now diametrically opposed to one another. But the narrator does go out of his way to state that Zeus does not want the Greeks to be wiped out. Remember, he's still just fulfilling the prayer of Achilles to his mother Thetis, to bring glory to Hector and woes to Agamemnon. The relationship between Zeus and two of his brothers, Hades in addition to Poseidon, is an interesting one. These three brothers each rule over a portion of the cosmos. Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld, and Zeus the heavens. But they're not really equal. Zeus is definitely the leader, and the others steer clear of offending him. Poseidon, as the younger of these two divine brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, is still avoiding providing open support to the Greeks. Instead, he's maintaining the form of humans, going among the Greeks and encouraging them. Poseidon does not want to risk a direct confrontation with Zeus. The text here seems to imply that Zeus is no longer distracted like he was before, although it's not clear at this point if Zeus is unaware of Poseidon's interventions, or if Zeus is aware that Poseidon is there and he's okay with it as long as Poseidon is still in the form of a man and only going around encouraging the Greeks. Remember Zeus boasting that he could win against all the other gods at once in a tug of war? Maybe it's not just vain boasting. Zeus won his throne largely by violence, and he maintains it with violence. Violence and patronage and populating the mortal and divine worlds with his own offspring, but mostly violence and the threat of violence, which Poseidon wants to steer clear of. He's got a sweet gig ruling the sea. He does not want to risk that. Meanwhile, in the battle, Idomeneus cuts down Othryoneus. This was a guy who had joined the war only because he'd gotten King Priam to agree to let him marry Princess Cassandra. Oh, I'll fight for you, Priam, if you give me your daughter to marry. And since everyone in this war knows everyone else's business, Idomeneus gloats over him when he kills Othryoneus with a spear to the belly. Since this passage is omitted in the abridged version of Langleaf and Myers, here's what it says in their full translation. Othryoneus, verily I praise thee above all mortal men. Keep in mind, guy's dead now. If indeed thou shalt accomplish all that thou hast promised to Priam, son of Dardanus, that promised thee again his own daughter, yea, and we likewise would promise as much to thee, and fulfill it, and would give thee the fairest daughter of the son of Atreus, and bring her from Argos, and wed her to thee, if only thou wilt aid us to take the fair set citadel of Ilios. Nay, follow us, that we may make a covenant of marriage by the seafaring ships, for we are no hard exactors of the gifts of wooing. Burn! This may be the world's first recorded instance of sarcasm. Idomeneus starts dragging Othryoneus' body when Asios, remember him from the Trojan assault on the wall? He's the one who couldn't follow orders. He charged into the spike-filled ditch with his horses instead of advancing on foot like they decided. Asios now jumps in to defend the body of Othryoneus, and it does not go well. Idomeneus, spear to the throat. Asios is down. He falls like a tree being chopped down by shipwrights, cutting trees for lumber. He's in the dusty ground. He's screaming. Asios' chariot driver is so terrified that he's frozen. He's unable to move. He can't help him. Again, Idomeneus, spear through the belly, clean through the armor, chariot driver down. Now, Antilochus, Nestor's son, swoops in and nabs Asios' horses and chariot. Now Deiphobos, son of Priam, he's heroically outraged at the death of Asios, and he launches his spear at Idomeneus, who ducks behind his shield, and Deiphobos' spear goes whooshing over his head, grating along the edge of the shield as it flies. Unfortunately, behind Idomeneus was Hypsenor, a Greek who catches that spear in the liver. Deiphobos, pretending that he meant to hit Hypsenor, boasts, "Ah, verily, not unavenged lies Asios. Nay, methinks that even on his road to Hades, strong warden of the gate, he will rejoice at heart, since, lo, I have sent him an escort for the way." That's kind of cute, really. The idea that his dead buddy can see he's been avenged even before he makes it to the underworld. But this boast now makes the Greeks really angry, and especially Antilochus, who now makes a valiant stand over the body of Hypsenor. And this actually doesn't go too badly. Antilochus is defending the body of Hypsenor with his shield, while these other two Greek guys come in, pull the body out of the fighting and away from looty Trojan hands. We're back with Idomeneus now, and he's up against a Trojan named Alcathous, a brother-in-law of Aeneas. Poseidon uses his divine power to enthrall Alcathous to prevent him from moving. Oh, this is a rough one. I'm going to break my promise yet again and give you the gory details. This Alcathous did Poseidon subdue to Idomeneus, throwing a spell over his shining eyes and snaring his glorious limbs, so that he might neither flee backwards nor avoid the stroke, but stood steady as a pillar or a tree with lofty crown of leaves, when the hero Idomeneus smote him in the middle of the breast with the spear, and rent the coat of bronze about him, that aforetime warded death from his body, but now rang harsh as it was rent by the spear. And he fell with a crash, and the lance fixed in his heart that, still beating, shook the butt end of the spear. So first, we hear this horrible shrieking, this grating sound of metal on metal as the spear breaks through the armor and grinds against it. Then the butt end of the spear in Idomeneus' hand, it's throbbing with the continued beating of Alcathous' heart. Lub-dub, 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 until Ares himself mercifully ends Alcathous' life. Oh, so grisly. After this, Idomeneus is strutting. He feels unstoppable, and he boasts to Deiphobos, "Deiphobos, are we to deem it fair acquittal that we have slain 3 men for 1, since thou boastest thus? Nay, sir, but stand thou up also thyself against me, that thou mayst know what manner of son of Zeus am I that have come hither. For Zeus first begat Minos, the warden of Crete, and Minos got him a son, the noble Deucalion, and noble Deucalion begat me, a prince over many men in wide Crete. And now have the ships brought me hither, a bane to thee, and thy father, and all the Trojans." Deiphobos considers facing Idomeneus himself now, alone, but thinks that looking for Aeneas right about now to help him would be a better idea. And he quickly finds Aeneas, moping by himself, not fighting, not in the action, over near the fallen Greek defenses. Green's translation has an explanatory footnote. Apparently, there was a rivalry between the 2 branches of the Trojan royal family, Aeneas's and Priam's, and that Aeneas felt he wasn't adequately honored by the king, which is why he's off moping by himself right now. Deiphobos, although he represents the rival family branch as Priam's son, appeals to Aeneas that Alcathous was not only Aeneas' brother-in-law, but as he was older, he'd cared for Aeneas when Aeneas was a youth. Deiphobos asked Aeneas, "Aeneas, thou counselor of the Trojans, now verily there is great need that thou shouldst succor thy sister's husband, if any care for kin doth touch thee. Nay, follow, let us succor Alcathous, thy sister's husband, who of old did cherish thee in his hall, when thou wert but a little one. And now, lo, spear-famed Idomeneus hath stripped him of his arms." Aeneas doesn't say anything in response. He lets his actions speak for him by charging straight away at Idomeneus, who sees him coming from a long way off and is kind of worried. The narrator has already referenced Idomeneus' gray hairs in this book. He's not a young man anymore, despite his strutting in front of Deiphobos and his earlier subtle digs at Meriones. So Idomeneus calls out to his comrades, "Hither, friends, and rescue me, all alone as I am, and terribly I dread the onslaught of swift-footed Aeneas that is assailing me. For he is right strong to destroy men in battle, and he hath the flower of youth, the greatest avail that may be. Yea, if he and I were of like age, and in this spirit whereof we now are, speedily should he or I achieve high victory." So now Aeneas gathers around him some of his men, Agenor and Deiphobos, with a mass of unnamed Trojans as well. We're going to have an old-fashioned fight over a corpse now, with the corpse being Alcathous. Idomeneus and Aeneas now face off. Aeneas attacks first, throwing his spear. Aeneas misses, and the spear sticks into the ground behind the Greeks, where he can't get to it. Instead of immediately returning the attack against Aeneas, Idomeneus now strikes Enomaus, disemboweling him. Idomeneus tries to loot the corpse, but only gets as far as stealing the spear. But we can see why Idomeneus has such a massive supply of spears. He's really thrifty in battle. Unfortunately, he's also getting old. The narrator has already mentioned Idomeneus' gray hairs a couple of times this book. Now the narrator explains that Idomeneus is not fast enough on his feet to either get the corpse fully looted in time or even to escape from the battle. So old man Idomeneus has no choice but to continue and stand and face the enemy. Because his slow old feet won't let him escape, Idomeneus now just slowly backs away as Deiphobos advances towards him and launches another spear and another miss. And again, Deiphobos accidentally kills someone else. The errant spear hits Ascalaphos, grandson of Ares, who, the narrator explains, doesn't even know that his grandson has been killed because Ares is up on Olympos, following Zeus's command to stay out of the war. That is not how you win a war, Ares, god of war. Poseidon is here, and he's posing a real threat to your guys. And Poseidon is the god of fish and seawater. Come on, Ares. Now the Greeks and Trojans are fighting over the Battle of Askelaphos. Deiphobos lunges, trying to steal the helmet off the dead man. But Meriones is there and stabs Deiphobos in the arm with his spear. Deiphobos drops the helmet. Meriones darts in and grabs his spear, pulling it free from Deiphobos' arms. Very thrifty. He's learning from his friend Idomeneus. A spear saved is a spear earned. Pretty soon Meriones will have his own spear hoard. Deiphobos is now led out of the battle by his brother Polites, nursing his wounded arm. The battle continues without Deiphobos. Aeneas kills a Greek named Aphareus, who is one of the sentinels. Antilochus now sees an opportunity and attacks a Lycian and follower of Sarpedon named Thoon. When Thoon has turned away, he severs a blood vessel in the back of his neck, and that blood vessel doesn't exist. I studied anatomy. It's not a thing. Green's footnote explains that there was a belief in antiquity that such a blood vessel exists along the back of the spinal column. But it doesn't. The jugular veins and carotid arteries both run along the front of the spinal column. Antilochus crouches down now to loot Thoon's corpse, but he's hiding behind his shield, and Poseidon is protecting him while the blows keep coming against him. But he's safe, and since he's safe, he's peeking out, looking for opportunities to strike at the Trojans from down there, and deciding whether he should thrust or throw his spear. While he's debating this in his mind, the Trojan ally Adamas, son of recently killed Asios, spots Antilochus down there, peeking out. Adamas strikes, throwing a spear straight at Antilochus. Poseidon defends. The spear lands in Antilochus' shield, broken, half of it stuck in the shield, the other half lying on the ground. Not thrifty, Adamas. Adamas must have sensed that something divine had thwarted his attack, because he backs off now, trying to get to the safety of his Trojan allies. But Meriones now pursues Adamas and spears him in the lower abdomen. Adamas falls, convulsing like a bound ox. Meriones comes up to him and pulls his spear out, and the blood loss quickly takes his life. But again, some thriftiness from Meriones here. Maybe he really does have his own spear hoard in his hut already. He might just be the spear hoard king, and borrowing from Idomeneus rather than using his own spear is just a thriftiness strategy. Now, Helenos, he's another son of Priam, clonks Deipyros on the temple with a heavy sword, knocking his helmet clean off, which goes tumbling to the ground. An unnamed Greek nabs the free helmet as Deipyros dies. Angered at the loss of Deipyros, who I honestly don't remember coming across before, Menelaos strides forward, making threats against Helenos. Helenos draws his bow and fires an arrow right at Menelaos. Clink! It bounces off Menelaos' armor. Now Menelaos throws his spear, and it lands in Helenos' hand. Agenor pulls Helenos back, removes the spear, and dresses the wound with some wool, because that's what they had. They had wool. Now, Pysandros advances against Menelaos. This is not the Pysandros we saw earlier, who, along with his brother Hippolochos, was begging Agamemnon for mercy and did not get it. This is another Pysandros, who's about to be killed by another Atreides. Menelaos strikes first, launching another spear, but the shot goes wide. Pysandros throws his spear now. It hits square on Menelaos' shield. The throw is too weak to make it through the shield, and the spear shaft breaks off, leaving the spear point embedded in the shield. Menelaos draws his sword, studded with silver, and steps forward to strike at Pysandros, who seems to be unarmed. But no! From behind his shield, Pysandros pulls out a bronze axe with a hefty olive wood handle. They both strike each other at the same time. Pysandros lands a hit on the very top of Menelaos' helmet, right there where the horsehair crest is. Menelaos' spear catches Pysandros on the forehead, an unprotected spot, and his skull is crushed. Menelaos strips the armor from Pysandros, and in the most proper heroic fashion, plants one foot upon the chest of his defeated foe and announces to all those around, Even thus then surely ye will leave the ships of the Danaans of the swift steeds, ye Trojans overweening, insatiate of the dread din of war. Yea, and ye shall not lack all other reproof and shame, wherewith ye made me ashamed, ye hounds of evil, having no fear in your hearts of the strong wrath of loud thundering Zeus, the god of guest and host, who one day will destroy your steep citadel. O ye that wantonly carried away my wedded wife and many of my possessions, when ye were entertained by her, now again ye are fain to throw ruinous fire on the seafaring ships, and to slay the Achaean heroes. Nay, but we will yet refrain you from battle, for as eager as ye be, O Zeus, verily they say that thou dost excel in wisdom all others, both gods and men, and all these things are from thee. How wondrously art thou favoring men of violence, even the Trojans, whose might is ever iniquitous, nor can they have their fill of the din of equal war. Of all things there is satiety, yea, even of love and sleep, and of sweet song, and dance delectable, whereof a man would sooner have his fill than war, but the Trojans are insatiate of battle. The Trojan ally Harpalion now advances and attacks Menelaus, but Menelaus' shield saves him. Seeing that his attack failed, Harpalion backs off, nervous, looking this way and that, trying to get back among his friends. Too late. Meriones has come up with a bow and arrows from somewhere. Last we knew, he was reusing that same spear over and over, and he scores a hit. Harpalion takes an arrow right to the butt. It ends up in his bladder, and he's down quickly. Now it's Paris' turn to be heroically enraged by the death of a friend. In revenge for Harpalion's killing, Paris shoots an arrow at the Corinthian Euchenor. There's a confusing little bit of story here about Euchenor, who had participated with Diomedes in the recent war against Thebes. So Euchenor, however, was not one of the Epigoni, or the 7 leaders of that effort, like Diomedes and Sthenelus. Euchenor may have had some desire to avoid going to this war, because the narrator mentions him avoiding paying a fine. And I had to do a little digging to find out what this meant. The fine that the narrator mentions is in reference to an option that Greeks had to simply pay Agamemnon rather than get drafted for the Trojan War. And this is something that was actually also an option at times in American history, and particularly in the Civil War, where I guess rich people could just pay their way out by hiring a substitute to be drafted. However, Euchenor's father was something of a seer, and he predicted that if Euchenor paid the fine and stayed home, then Euchenor would catch and die of some disease. So Euchenor's father didn't want to waste the money paying off Agamemnon and sent Euchenor to the war instead. I don't think being a seer and being a good parent are necessarily compatible traits. Anyway, Euchenor ends up with Paris' arrow right between his skull and his jawbone, and he dies. That's real thrifty, I suppose, not wasting money on a war draft fine. And old Pops won't have to pay for a funeral now either, since the boy died over in Troy. So saving money left and right, these guys. All this action we've been covering has been over on the left side of the Greek camp. Now we're going to go see what's happening at the center of camp, where Hector has been since he broke through the gate. Hector is unaware that the Greeks are doing pretty well for themselves over on the left side with the help of Poseidon. Hector is facing off against a variety of Greeks, men from Locris, Elis, Phthia, and Athenians. The Athenians here are led by Menestheus. The Epeans are led by Meges. Also in this area here is Medon, a half-brother of Oilean Aias, who's fighting in the back among the Locrians. None of these characters are super important, however. Oilean Aias, despite being a leader of the Locrians, isn't fighting among his people. The Locrians would rather shoot arrows from a distance. They're not close-range fighters, and they lack the armor for it. Oilean Aias is still, of course, fighting side by side with Telamonian Aias, right up close to Hector and his men. So here in the center, we've got the close-range fighting being led by the two Aiases, along with a lot of other Greeks, and behind the front-range fighters are the Locrians, showering Hector and his Trojans with arrows. Polydamas now sees that the Trojan attack on the camp is faltering. The Trojans are scattered and unorganized, and they're facing much stiffer opposition than they expected. I have to imagine that they thought the breach of the wall would have sent the Greeks into a complete panic, but it didn't. Polydamas suggests they call the Trojans and their allies together, get organized, and focus their attacks on the ships. And while previously Hector hasn't always responded well to Polydamas' suggestions, this time he agrees, saying, "Polydamas, do thou stay here with all the best of the host. But I will go thither to face the war, and swiftly will return again, when I have straightly led on them my commands." Polydamas goes off to rally the troops, while Hector takes a quick survey of the battle. He's looking for his brothers, for Deiphobos and Helenos, and I suppose for Paris too. And he's looking for the other leaders on their sides, for Asios and Adamas. And he sees that all these guys are either wounded or missing. It's Paris who he finally finds. And while Paris is doing what he's supposed to be doing, which is fighting and encouraging other Trojans in the fight, Hector isn't happy once he comes across his least favorite brother, and he says, "Thou evil Paris, fairest of face, thou that lustest for women, thou seducer, where, prithee, are Deiphobos, and the strong prince Helenos, and Adamas, son of Asios, and Asios, son of Hyrtacos, and where's Orthrioneus? Now hath all high Ilios perished utterly. Now, too, thou seest, is sheer destruction sure." Paris doesn't usually defend himself much against Hector's insults, but this time he stands up for himself a bit, and it works. I'm kind of proud of the kid. "Hector, since thy mind is to blame one that is blameless, some other day might I rather withdraw me from the war, since my mother bare not even me wholly a coward. For from the time that thou didst gather the battle of thy comrades about the ships, from that hour do we abide here and war with the Danaans ceaselessly, and our comrades concerning whom thou inquirest are slain. Only Deiphobos and the strong prince Helenos have both withdrawn, both of them being wounded in the hand with long spears, for Cronion kept death away from them. But now lead on, wheresoever thy heart and spirit bid thee, and we will follow with thee eagerly, nor methinks shall we lack for valor, as far as we have strength, but beyond his strength may no man fight, howsoever eager he be." Hector is persuaded to calm his anger, and he and Paris rejoin the fight around Polydamas, who's by now accomplished his mission to rally the Trojans. And they went forth where the war and din were thickest, round Cebriones and noble Polydamas, and Phalces, and Orthios, and godlike Polyphetes, and Palmus, and Ascanios, and Morus, son of Hippotion, who had come in their turn out of deep-soiled Ascaniae on the morn before, and now Zeus urged them to fight. And these set forth like the blast of violent winds that rushes earthward beneath the thunder of Father Zeus, and with marvelous din doth mingle with the salt sea, and therein are many swelling waves of the loud roaring sea, arched over and white with foam, some vanward, others in the rear, even so the Trojans arrayed in van and rear, shining with bronze, followed after their leaders. Hector is stalking, looking for a Greek to face him, and Telamonian Aias sees this, and goads him by saying, "Sir, draw nigh. Wherefore dost thou vainly try to dismay the Argives? We are in no wise ignorant of war, but by the cruel scourge of Zeus are we Achaeans vanquished. Surely now thy heart hopes utterly to spoil the ships, but we too have hands presently to hold our own. Verily, your peopled city will long ere that beneath our hands be taken and sacked. But for thee, I tell thee that the time is at hand, when thou shalt pray in thy flight to Father Zeus and the other immortal gods, that thy fair-maned steeds may be fleeter than falcons, thy steeds that are to bear thee to the city, as they storm in dust across the plain." As Aias is talking, an eagle, the sign of Zeus, remember, flies on their right side. That's a good sign for the Greeks. And of course, since the Trojans are facing the Greeks, that means the bird is on their left side. That's bad for the Trojans. The Greeks cheer this good omen. But remember, Hector has said that he doesn't believe in omens other than to fight for your country. And when it comes to the actual fight, things still really aren't looking that great for the Greeks. The enemy is literally in their camp, and it's only their constant harassing and fighting back that's keeping the Trojans from setting fire to the ships. So the Greeks can't stop. They can't take a break. There's nowhere for them to go. If the ships burn, they're trapped in enemy country and easy for the Trojans to finish off at their leisure. So Hector is justified in his arrogant response to Aias. Aias, thou blundering boaster, what sayest thou? Would that indeed I were forever as surely the son of Aegis-bearing Zeus, and that my mother were Lady Hera, and that I were held in such honor as Apollo and Athene, as verily this day is to bring other evil on all the Argives. And thou among them shall be slain, if thou hast the heart to await my long spear, which shall rend thy lily skin. And thou shalt glut with thy fat and flesh the birds and dogs of the Trojans, falling among the ships of the Achaeans. So he spake, and led the way, and they followed with wondrous din, and the whole host shouted behind. And the Argives on the other side answered with a shout, and forgot not their valiance, but abode the onslaught of the bravest of the Trojans. And the cry of the two hosts went up through the higher air to the splendor of Zeus. That's it. That's the end of Book 13. We've made it more than halfway through the Iliad, but the best parts are yet to come. Get ready for more action, more drama, as the gods get involved again in big ways. Lots more to come. Next time, we'll cover books 14 and 15. This has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening. See you next time.